My goal with this build and all my builds is to provide something that works in level cap and feels good to use in level cap, but also feels good to use in general content. That means with this build, you can be confident running Netracells, EDA, ETA, any kind of content, and it'll be comfortable all the way up to level cap cascade. To get right into the build, I'll start with explaining the R slot, which is corrosive projection. This will give us roughly an 80% damage increase on fully armored enemies, assuming you aren't stripping them. For Valkyr, I still think strength is probably the most important thing to spec onto her because it acts as a multiplier in the formula of Hysteria. It'll also buff our Warcry and our Nourish. For strength, we have Umbral Intensify, Blind Rage, and Augmented. This will get us to 303% strength at maximal augmented. The next most important stat is range, and we can get to 190 range with Stretch, Augur Reach, and Cunning Drift. Augur Reach also lets us shield gate along with catalyzing shields, so no matter how much shields that you gain, you'll always get the full 1.33 seconds of shield gate time. Duration isn't super important on Valkyr. A Prime Continuity or an Archon Continuity will do just fine. This paired with Eternal War means you never have to recast your Warcry. This is important because if you lose your Warcry, you lose a very big chunk of your energy because we're running Arcane Battery here, and Valkyr gets most of her armor from the combination of Warcry and Hysteria. And as far as energy economy goes, we run Equilibrium, Arcane Battery, and Nourish. This is a very comfortable energy economy, even with the negative efficiency from Blind Rage, especially when you consider that we're running Synth Deconstruct on our Sentinel. For the subsume slot, we are going to take Nourish. This helps with energy economy, but it also gives us a pretty big AoE viral proc, which more than doubles your damage. For our Archon shards, we're running 4 melee crit damage shards and an Amber cast speed shard. The cast speed shard is mostly for higher level content where you don't want to be gating with Ripline too often because sometimes it can just be jank. So you'll end up gating with Warcry and Nourish. I find this especially useful in Void Cascade. As far as weapons go, it really doesn't matter what you run, as long as one of your weapons can kill acolytes. In this case, both of these weapons can kill acolytes just fine, but I'd say Latron is probably the best option. You can run a lot of different kinds of builds on this. Just make sure you have primary dexterity on for a bit more combo duration. Semi-cannonade, crit delay, split chamber, hammer shot, vital sense is all you really need on the build. High voltage, a Riven, and amalgam serration are kind of just sprinkles on top. If you don't have a Riven, I would just suggest running infected clip or finding something else to run. Praetos isn't essential, but it's a really nice quality of life since it gives you free parkour velocity and sprint speed and slide. And finally are the Talons. This is about as much damage as you're going to get with Talons. We use Prime Reach for more range, Blood Rush, Sack Steel, and Gladiator Might for crit chance. Sack Pressure gives us a bit more front load melee damage, which is occasionally pretty nice. Honestly, nowadays you don't really even need a Tennokai mod, but it's still nice to have. The only thing I'd say is kind of weird about this Talons build is Weeping Wounds, since this only gets us to 54% status. However, in the case that your Sentinel is dead, which it absolutely will be in level cap cascade from time to time, Weeping Wounds is really nice because it lets you prime enemies on your own to contribute to condition overload. As far as the Sentinel build goes, you can run literally any Sentinel that you want. I chose Nautilus because it has pretty good base survivability. The best option would be Worm, but I'm out of loadout slots. The build for Nautilus is also pretty simple. We use Guardian for Shield Gate. This is a flexible slot, you can use whatever, but I find the passive Shield Gate from Guardian to be really nice. Next up is Seismic Bond. This doesn't actually affect the efficiency of Hysteria. That's really good to note. A lot of people think that Seismic applies to channeled abilities. It doesn't apply to the channeled ability itself. It applies to the other abilities that you're using while the channeled ability is up. This means that when you're spamming Ripline and maybe your other abilities for Shield Gate, it eases a little bit of the negative efficiency from Blind Rage. Next is Duplex Bond. This just lets you prime pretty large amounts of enemies. Paired with Shivering Contagion, this lets you freeze pretty big groups of enemies. Next is Manifold. We use Manifold for a few reasons. The first reason is to reduce the cooldown on Guardian. The other reason Manifold is used is because when your Sentinel gets hit and it has Nourish, it'll spread that AoE viral proc, but it'll also spread all the elements that you have on your Sentinel weapon. Assault mode, self-explanatory, regen, helps ease the recovery time. Synth Deconstruct gives us health orbs for better energy economy. Momentous Bond just gives us more procs and also helps the Sentinel recover a bit quicker. Animal Instinct and Vacuum are also self-explanatory. If you do want to swap things out, I would say you can swap Guardian for anything you want. I'd say Aerial Bond is a really good option. You can replace Manifold Bond with this or Guardian with this. This lets you get very quick reses off. Finally, for the Tazicor build, we just have a pretty basic Corrosive Cold Shivering Contagion build. This lets us freeze pretty big groups of enemies very quickly. And also just spreads a cold proc to a very large number of enemies very quickly. If you don't have a Riven for this, you can run Prime Fast Hands instead, or you can even run Radiated Reload. I'd say I don't really recommend running Radiation though, because it can make things a bit messy. If you're wondering why I didn't pick Doriga as the Sentinel of choice, it's because Arc Coil is just slow, a little bit inconsistent, and it doesn't give you as many procs as Tazicor, and it's also much closer range. I'd say the only reason I'd use Doriga is if I want to run Tenacious Bond and also Augur mods. As far as the build goes, that's pretty much it. The biggest change with the Valkyrie work is the removal of invincibility, which in my opinion is a bit of a weird choice from DE. I don't think Invuln is super bad for the game when it's limited to 3 frames, now 2 since Valkyrie doesn't have it anymore. Especially when one of those frames has the condition of like barely being able to move, which is Nyx. Revenant is like the only frame in the game that actually has true invulnerability with no drawbacks. And Valkyr before was restricted to melee, and the reason I think that's a big deal is because I think the things that are actually unhealthy for this game are setups that can nuke entire maps with 0 effort. Like the reason Slime was nerfed was because you could literally slam with 0 priming, 0 effort, all the way up to level cap in a 20-meter radius. The other thing I think is kind of busted is melee influence. It's just undoubtedly way too strong, and I think it's fine to stay in the game because a lot of people don't actually use it in a way that is disruptive to others usually. The reason I think the removal of Invuln on Valkyr is weird is because she wasn't the frame that was hugging kills from anyone, and she wasn't the frame that was really affecting others in a negative way. Like, just staying alive isn't gonna bring down the gameplay experience for others, and staying alive isn't really gonna change your own gameplay experience very much. It's so easy to do nowadays. You can tap a button with any frame that has shield gate, and then there are also invisibility frames that have an easier time staying alive because you quite literally have to do nothing. If your shield breaks, you can just rolling guard, and you might have some shield gating capability, but it's not important. There's definitely a lot of good stuff that came from the rework though. Valkyrie getting a grouping ability is massive. She still can't really use melee influence properly, which means that a grouping ability is really the only way she's going to be able to compete with kills. So giving Ripline the ability to group is a massive buff in my opinion, and the mobility you get from it is also amazing. The other thing I think is nice about the rework is that Valkyr can fully utilize battery now, which means you just get like a free 1000 energy from slotting that into your arcane slot. I definitely do think Valkyr feels better with her neutral combos now. I barely find myself using Tanokai even in level cap cascade. It just doesn't feel necessary anymore. I think as far as the bad things go, the very obvious is no longer having invincibility. This isn't really a huge deal with the death gating. It's just like a bit uncomfortable once you get to level cap because you pretty much have to constantly be upkeeping your death gate, or you have to be playing super safe by spamming your abilities, which you might end up doing anyways, just passively using Ripline. I do think that DE ultimately failed with their vision of Valkyr though. For one, she really didn't need the extra damage. You were hitting damage cap even prior to this update with like a good bit of priming, and she had absolutely no trouble all the way up to level cap as far as damage goes. So I think paralysis, the changes made to paralysis are a huge missed opportunity to actually do something with that ability, especially with the augment, because now the augment on paralysis is literally just a much worse version of what Ripline can do. The other thing I think is kind of a failure with the Valkyr rework is the fact that very few people are actually going to use her as a health tank. It can be viable to run Valkyr as a health tank, but overall, I don't like doing it just because it takes up so many mod slots for effectively worse survivability than just shield gating. I do hope that this causes DE to take some action regarding health tanks, because they just don't seem to have been in a good spot for a very long time now. Like, as far as I can remember playing this game way back in 2016 or so when I started, I don't think I've ever opted for health tanking. Way back it was like quick thinking and some energy pool, and now it's just shield gate spam on pretty much every frame that isn't invisible or invincible. And Valkyr is no different. She went from being invincible, having to spec nothing into survivability, to having to spam abilities like every single other frame in the game does to stay alive, which I think is kind of a shame. I think they should have just kept her invuln, but also made the other changes so that she's more fun and dynamic to play. The other thing I think is weird about the term tank in a game like Warframe is that typically in other games, when you're playing a tank character, your purpose is to be able to tank things and, actually take a hit and not invest a ton into your survivability. But in Warframe, if you try to spec into health tanking, you end up using most of your mod slots for effectively worse survivability than shield gating. So there's just so many reasons it just doesn't feel good to health tank. I think another badly missed opportunity is to give Valkyr some actual forward momentum with her stance, because her stance is exactly the same as it was before, which means that slide attacking is still your best option for a combination of mobility and killing stuff. Of course, pair this with ripline, but even when you ripline a group, you're still going to end up using your slide attack more than anything else. That's all I really have to say on the matter. I hope you guys like the build in the video. I'm just going to queue up some Valkyr gameplay.